Please take your seats. Sergeant at Arms, please secure the doors. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. President?
All right, who do we have today? We are pleased to have Chaplain Ray Ranker from the Lutheran Campus Ministry at the University of Maryland, College Park, guest of the distinguished senator from District 21. Members, please rise for the invocation.
Siblings, I invite you into a moment of prayer and reflection. We are dust, and to dust we shall return. And you, O God, have made beauty out of dust. As we thank you, O God, for the gift of life, we remember the thousands of Marylanders who lost their lives due to COVID-19. We mourn the many who have lost their lives due to addiction, depression, and other ailments and accidents. Be with those who mourn today. We recognize our human fragility, that we are dust, and to dust we shall return. And yet you, O God, provide us with opportunity to love others in our pursuit for truth, for peace, with justice. I pray especially today that you continue to empower us, and especially this chamber, to be a force for good in the world. As servants of your people, give wisdom, guidance, and protection to these senators and all public servants as they make decisions and forge legacies that advance the well-being of all Marylanders, especially the poor and the marginalized. We are dust, and to dust we shall return. And your love, O God, for all people lives on forever. Amen.
Mr. President?
Yes, Chair recognizes Senator from the 33rd District.
I just wanted to take a second while the senator from District 21 came on the floor so he could ask that the prayer be journalized. It was a wonderful expression. The interesting thing is, as a representative from the University of Maryland, he's young, he's articulate, he's charismatic, and he's the right person to be there.
Thank you very much for that observation, Senator. We greatly appreciate the teamwork too, Senator from the 21st District.
Thank you very much, Senator, Mr. President. And I just want to say a word or two about Reverend Ranker. He's a neighbor in College Park. As you know, he is the Lutheran chaplain at the university. But he has devoted his life, since he was a student at College Park, to ministry. He served abroad with Lutheran International Services around the world with his wife. They came back to College Park, to the university, and are just a tremendous asset to the whole community. So I move that pastor's prayer be journalized.
Without objection, most certainly we will journalize the pastor's excellent invocation and remarks and peaceful start of the day. All right, has everyone recorded their presence in the chamber? Double check. Looks like we got a few folks here that need to hit their buttons. All right, the clerk will take the call. With 46 members in the chamber and a quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland is now in session. All right, any announcements? Announcements for the good of the order? We don't have a very busy day today, so I thought I would pass along some advice from my 6-year-old. Who had an interesting school virtual session, and she said, "Daddy, I learned how to deal with stress." And I said, "Okay, go ahead." And she said, "Do you like soup or hot chocolate?" And I was like, "Well, I guess it depends, but let's say hot chocolate." And she goes, "Okay, well, you know when hot chocolate is too hot, and you really breathe in really hard and then blow to make it cool down." And I said, "Yeah, sure, that's cooling down the hot chocolate." She said, "Well, that's called belly breathing, and that's how you get rid of stress. So if you get stressed, take a deep breath in and do a belly breath out." And so I said, "Cora, I'm going to pass that along because that is advice that I'm going to need, especially over these next 40 days. So for those of you when you're having that moment, apparently belly breathing is the trick. So I hear from the wisdom of the 6-year-old. All right, any other announcements before we jump into things? If not, so be considered the reading of the journal from the previous legislative day. We've got just a few more Bills coming in. We've got, let's see, Senate bills, calendar number 32. Clerk will read the bill.
Senate Bill
A Senate bond initiative 24. Remember, March 8th is the deadline. Clerk will read the bond initiatives.
Senator Young, Fredericktown Players, B&T.
All right, we've got some more House bills. House has sent over some of their bills here. This is House of Delegates calendar number 8. Clerk will read the bills.
House Bill 48, emergency bill, Delegate Bhandari, criminal procedure, registered sex offenders, entry onto school property, JPR.
Majority Leader moves so be considered the reading of the bills. All right, we've got a layover calendar. This is calendar number 9. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 10, Senator Waldstreicher, election law, polling sites, firearms prohibition. Question is on the adoption of the 2 amendments and the favorable report.
All right, let's see. Question is on the 2 committee amendments. So let's start with the amendments. Any discussion on the amendments, the committee's amendments? If not, all in favor of the amendment say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The 2 committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the favorable committee report as amended. Chair recognizes the senator from the 29th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have
Senator-
an amendment.
Senator, give us just one moment. If senators, please check your phones, computers. Can we turn off our sound in the midst of the Senate chamber, please? All right, Senator, what the number of the amendment? Oh, I'm sorry. We have to adopt the favorable report first, Senator. Let's see if there's a discussion on the favorable report before we take up any new amendments. Any discussion on the report? If not, all in favor of the report as amended, say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Senator from the 29th District, what is the number for that amendment?
423023-1.
423023. 423023. Give us just one moment. All right. Do we have it up there? 423023. Do we have it on the system? Almost there. Excellent. Perfect. Senator May explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. In my district, very similar to most everyone's in here, large majority of the polling precincts are that of schools. The one thing that this bill does is it overlooks the fact that in our districts, most of our police departments allow off-duty use of a police car. The requirement for that police officer to use his car, and we know that visual deterrence stops and slows down criminal activity. They are required to carry their firearm when they are in that car. So if a person pulls up to a voting precinct in an off-duty capacity, they have a firearm on their person. To walk in under the conditions of this bill, they then would have to leave the handgun in their car, which, based on the recent issues that have involved police officers and the fact that many marked cruisers have been being broken into, there are policies and procedures that say they can't keep guns in their cars any longer. So we have created a situation where this person, this off-duty police officer who shows up at a voting precinct in his car, cannot carry the gun in there, then he commits a violation. Now, this also occurs in a rural area like mine. Everyone in my district, we know who the local policemen are. They all carry a firearm. They're entitled to 364 days of the year under certain provisions. They carry their firearms into that school with them every time they walk into that school. Now, all of a sudden, because they are voting, they are not allowed to do that. Not only are they not allowed to do that, if they forget, because every other day that they've gone to that school, they have carried their firearm. If they forget, now they've committed a violation. I think that this is a very reasonable amendment, and I would ask for a favorable. Thank you.
Senator has moved the amendment. Chair recognizes the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the Senate. Unfortunately, I hadn't seen this other than about 15 seconds ago, so I'm having to respond very quickly. Ladies and gentlemen, we already have made an exception in the law for an on-duty police officer or someone hired by the State Board of Elections for security. What this does is saying if you're retired or you're off duty, you can go with a gun. Currently, the law says other than an active police officer, you put it in your trunk. I mean, I don't think that's a lot to ask for a retired police officer. I mean, if you look at a cost-benefit analysis, someone who is talking loudly about a certain candidate and is holstering a gun, I don't think is the kind of thing we want to have in elections. Automatic weapons, threats on the governor to kidnap the governor, automatic weapons, threats on the governor to kidnap the governor. We want to go in the other direction. We want a police officer. Guns shouldn't be allowed near the polling place. It's fairly simple. I would urge a red vote on the amendment.
All right. Yes, Chair recognizes the minority whip on the amendment.
Sorry, I'm trying to pull up the amendment here. Just have a question for the maker of the amendment.
The maker of the amendment yield? Appears so. Senator may
Yes.
proceed.
This is to prohibit, or this is to allow off-duty police officers to carry,
That's correct.
please? Okay, I have a question for the floor leader.
Will the floor leader yield for a question? Senator may proceed.
Sure.
My understanding of state law when we did this is we specifically allow off-duty police to carry a gun onto school grounds, correct?
I'm checking. I don't know the answer to that.
I actually have the code and the title. Title 4, Subtitle 1, 4102.
Senator, hold on 1 second. Just 1 second. Does the floor leader want to yield to the...
Senator, I'll accept that without confirmation, but let's assume
Yeah,
that's true.
that's my memory. So I guess a question for the floor leader. Most of these are in schools where the polling places are. So right now under state law, and rightfully so, we say off-duty police can carry a firearm onto schools because if something happens, God forbid, at a school, they're police and they can protect people. So if somebody shows up, like you're saying in Michigan or something, to cause trouble, why wouldn't we not want a police officer who is carrying a gun there to prevent something bad from happening? And then I guess the other question is, you would allow them to carry a gun into a polling place on a normal day when there's children in the school, but then when there's not children there, you would say they can't.
Yeah, first of all, this, as you know, on most election days, schools are closed, so children are not there. Look, I think election and the ability to vote is a unique circumstance in our society and in our culture. We should not allow any potential vehicles for intimidation to be present. I don't know how else to explain it. If the gun is kept in the trunk, if there's an emergency, they can run to their car and get it out. But I think to allow not only off-duty, but retired police officers to carry a weapon, I don't think is in the best interest of encouraging people to vote.
All right, Mr. President, if I could speak on this
the
amendment. I would urge the body to adopt this amendment. Years ago, we actually had this debate. I believe it was Senate Bill 218, which dealt with all the gun control in the state and dealt with different penalties. Back then, the General Assembly explicitly said, and we have said time and time again, that the laws to say on school grounds, we exempt police who are off duty from carrying firearms on school grounds because we want police to have firearms to protect people in case something happens. And if the point of this bill is to protect people at a polling place, I just think it's crazy to disarm police officers at a polling place. These are people there who are supposed to be protecting us. And this does the opposite of the intent of this bill. If the intent of the bill is to worry about people showing up with automatic weapons intimidating people, what would your first response would be to call the police? What if somebody shows up and starts shooting? The police officer's stuck there and his gun's in the car. I mean, this is just bad policy. I think that the maker of the amendment himself is a retired police officer. We have retired police officers in this body. And I'd be very comfortable at a polling place. I would hope if something would happen at a polling place, there was a police officer there, duty or off duty, carrying a firearm. They're our protectors. So I would urge a favorable on this, and this is very consistent with state law. If we vote down this amendment, we're saying a police officer can walk into a school filled with children with a gun and they can't walk in on election day when there's no children there and adults and not have a gun. That doesn't make any sense. It's a huge contradiction.
So just as a,
Just a clarification,
yes,
on-duty police officers or those hired by the State Board of Election for security may have a gun. That is very explicit. But for the hundreds of retired police officers, allowing them to come on election day with displaying their gun is something we don't want to encourage. So we have an exception. We deal with active police officers. We haven't had a lot of incidents. We can't tell the effect of intimidation. We just want to minimize those opportunities.
all right.
So I urge your red vote.
All right, we're on the amendment. Just one second, Senator. Let's see if there are any senators who wish to speak who have not yet spoken. Chair recognizes the senator from the 34th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, without this amendment, the only people in a polling place who will be armed will be people who don't obey the law and who have ill intentions, or the occasional law enforcement officers who come and go from the polling places and are kind of spread thin on election day. I don't think that's what we want to do. I mean, let's face it, our society is dangerous, and I think that a polling place is probably, if you're trying to make trouble and spread evil around our society, that's a great target for someone who's intended to do us all harm. So knowing that off-duty police officers and retired police officers will be funneling through the polling places throughout the day is a resource that we really can't afford not to take advantage of. We need them in there. This is an awesome amendment because, at least in my polling places, the police officers are spread pretty thin. There's a lot of precincts, a lot of polling places, and you still have to police inside and out, as well as the rest of the community doesn't shut down. So having this resource available in what I think is a pretty vulnerable target only makes sense. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 27th District. On the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. In my county, and probably all three of the counties that I represent, law enforcement officers do have the take-home vehicle policy. And even if they're off duty, it's agency policy does not allow you to lock your weapon in the car and leave the weapon in the car and go into any facility and come back out. So I certainly understand that perspective of it. But could I have a question to the maker of the amendment?
Will the maker of the amendment yield? Senator may proceed.
Senator, as I understand it, as a retired law enforcement officer myself and having the ability to carry my weapon, I certainly understand how the retirees are also included in the amendment. And I believe the amendment is stating that the officer or retired officer is displaying the officer or retired officer's badge and credential. Is that correct?
That's correct. They would have to, just like pulling up if they were off duty, off using their police car, when they got out, they would have to have some ID displayed that they were a policeman. The only thing that would not be able to be displayed is their firearm. Their firearm, under the amendment, is required to be concealed. There is absolutely no time that they would be walking around a polling place that they could have a firearm visible.
All right, and I appreciate that. And second question, if I might, could you also ensure that the body understands that, as current law is written, if I go to my grandkids' school to pick them up, and if I happen to have my weapon with me, which is, not often these days, but there is an identification component to that, and that's where that ID comes into play. So could you further speak to that about the retired folks? I mean, you talked about the officers getting out of their cruisers, but about the retirees.
Senator, there's so much underscore here with the voice. I am having a hard time.
I'm sorry.
Hearing. If you could speak up.
Yeah. So the question is, could you explain to the body further about the retired law enforcement officer who has the ability to carry a weapon but also has to carry that ID card that says that they are required to be able to carry that in a concealed capacity. So could you explain that to the body?
Thank you for that question, Senator. Yes, as a retired officer, as you and I both are, we cannot carry a firearm that under LEOSA, the Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act, we are required to carry our firearm, and when we carry it, it has to be concealed. We cannot carry it so that anyone can see it. It's not supposed to be a visible bulge in your shirt, nothing like that. And that is the way if a retired person would be able to carry their firearm normally, there would be no difference under the law under this amendment. It would be the exact same.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. President and members of the body, look, I will just speak from this perspective, understanding what the amendment says, and I certainly understand the floor leader's concerns, but I think the thing that's most important here is that we all have an opportunity to vote, and that we are not restricted from voting, and that I actually believe that I'm going to be supporting this amendment. I think it does not do any harm to the processes that we have in place, and I don't see any challenges. I don't actually see any concerns with this. And unless the floor leader has something further, I'll be voting green on the amendment.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes Senator from the 10th District.
Just as one elderly voter, I'm afraid of guns. I'm afraid of people that I know are carrying guns. If this is allowed to stand, and if all those who are retired, and I don't know how they're carrying them if they're retired already under law in Maryland, can carry them, then I've got to find another way to vote. I'm really afraid. Given trauma that I have experienced watching things happen on streets with people with firearms, I don't want to be around them. And I think there are a lot of elderly people like me. I think we ought to do something else about it. I don't think that the average voting place ought to be so dangerous of all the places where you're going with firearms. If they've hired some to be there in case of an emergency, okay. But we don't need this. And I think there are a lot of elderly people like me who would be afraid if they knew that standing behind them or next to them or in the other line are folks with live firearms and ammunition. Yeah, I think it's a terrible idea.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the senator from Baltimore County, Harford County, followed by the Vice Chair of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question for the floor leader.
Will the floor leader yield? Appears so. Senator may proceed.
Thank you, sir. So,
Yes.
the idea behind this bill is intimidation. We just heard the previous speaker talking about how she's intimidated by guns. She doesn't want to see a gun. And the amendment sponsors amendment is basically for concealed gun for a retired police officer off duty that has to be concealed. My question to you was, a couple minutes ago when you were talking, you said you did a carve out for active duty police.
Yep.
And if the State Board of Elections hires security.
I believe that's right.
I guess my question is, what kind of security is State Board of Election going to hire?
Well, first of all, they would have to promulgate regulations if they were concerned about ballot security. So it's not like they can go willy-nilly and hire somebody.
But they could put
And
regulations.
in fact, police officers sometimes do regular checks at polling places and drop boxes and everything
No,
else
I
as well.
get that, and I respect and understand letting the police do it. My question is, who is the State Board going to hire to carry a gun to these polling places? Because if we're allowing them to promulgate these regulations, what are they going to say? What type of person? Because, there are people who have license to carry a firearm on their side, such as armor car services and stuff like that. Are these the type of people they're going to hire that, as the previous speaker said, that would intimidate her? Why were we giving the State Board that leeway?
Well, there might be situations where the state board feels the need to promulgate regulations if they need more regular security. If who knows what 2024 or 2028 will be. We saw what happened on January 6th downtown. So it is unlikely to be used, but it is giving some leeway, but it has to go through promulgating regulations, and there's a check and balance all the way through that.
I get that, but it's not saying who they are, what they have to be licensed, what kind of training they have to go through, like a police officer. So I just see that, looking at this amendment, this is for people who have been in law enforcement, who've been through training, who have retired or off duty. We're giving the state board the ability to hire. I know you say you still have to go through regulations, but theoretically it could be anybody who's able to qualify to carry a firearm who's had no specific training. So that's why it's kind of, I can't believe we're fighting this amendment to allow the bill with this loophole in it. So
well, Senator, let me throw out this possible example. Let's say 2024 we have an election, a presidential election, and there's candidate A and candidate B. And advocates for each side are in the parking lot, 100 feet away, advocating for the candidate. And one candidate says, I don't like what you're saying, and they push back their coat and they show there's a gun there. Do we want that to be allowed to happen? Okay, and we can bring out examples of somebody going into a polling place with submachine guns or coming here with a submachine gun, but we know intimidation is a lot more subtle. And if the supporter of candidate B is very strong on firearms and intimidating, even though they're not displaying it in a holster, it's really easy to move back your coat and let the person also advocating for candidate A know that you have a gun and you better shut the hell up. That's what this bill is trying to avoid and to minimize. So we encourage people to come out to vote and allow people to have public discourse at Election Day.
No, I understand it. So thank you for that. Mr. President, can I ask the sponsor?
Maker of the amendment,
Maker of the amendment question?
Yield for a question.
So, sir, former police officer, I don't know the law. Let's say that this gentleman and I are at the poll arguing over our candidates, and I do get upset, and I do pull my jacket back and show my weapon. Is that legal?
No, that is clearly a crime. And it was a crime before what we passed out of the Senate yesterday, but with the use of force that we just passed yesterday, that would now be even a more serious administrative penalty for that officer.
Well, okay,
So
no,
that-
I'm not a police officer.
Even if it was not, if it was a
I'm
retired,
just average Joe that, has a concealed carry permit for, for some reason for my job farming or something, and I do that. Is an intimidation factor to show him the Glock on my side. My question is, have I broken the law?
yes, that's
Okay.
a crime.
Thank you, Mr. President.
It was mean Hartford County Farms. Chair recognizes the Vice Chair of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I urge this body to vote red on this amendment. I appreciate the intent of the sponsor of this amendment, and I appreciate that he brought it to me beforehand. Listen, here's the question. The question is simply this. Do we want more guns at our polls? If the answer is no, then you should vote red on this amendment. The maker of the amendment mentioned that on 364 days of the year, retired police officers can bring their guns to a school under current law. But there is a protocol for that. Someone who is a retired officer can't just go pick up their granddaughter with a gun on their hip. They have to stop at the front office, identify themselves, so that the school knows that someone has a gun on campus. On Election Day, there is no such protocol. On Election Day, schools are not schools. Schools are polling places, and we don't need guns intimidating voters at our polling places. I urge a red vote on the amendment.
Thank you. Senator Chair recognizes the senator from the 35th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. Two questions. The first is for the maker of the amendment, if he would yield for a question.
Maker yield. Here so, Senator may proceed.
Just right now, to be clear, the way things currently are, so that, for instance, the election that was just recently held, could these off-duty and retired police officers carry a concealed weapon in under current law?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I just wanted that to be clear for one. Then I have a second question.
So whether this amendment passes, it would clearly not put any more firearms in an election precinct than what was there in any of the past elections we've had.
Okay, so this law would change what has already been. So the second question, if the floor leader would mind yielding for a question.
Senator may proceed.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Floor Leader.
Sure.
So now that we've established that this would be a change from what's already happening, have there been mass complaints by voters and folks going to the polls that there's all these dozens of retired police officers brandishing their weapons? And I mean, has this been a complaint in the past?
Senator, I think we're experiencing a new normal. We can't ignore what's happened across the country over the last 12 months. In fact, there was some concern there was going to be a rally at the Congress today, and they brought in extra troops. Can we be sure that the polling places in Maryland will be safe? I can't make that commitment. I mean, we've seen more and more interactions, threats, and danger in the last 12 months than I remember ever seeing in the history, at least of my life. So while I can't point out specific examples in Maryland, there is I think there is a disease, an anger at government, an anger at elections that is growing and growing, and we want to make sure it doesn't come to our state.
So why would there be the assumption that these retired and off-duty police officers would do something wrong, though, when there's no data in the past to suggest that that would be true?
We also didn't know January 6th was going to happen. We don't want a January 6th or January 8th or November 12th in Maryland. Again, we're experiencing new normal, and we don't want intimidation. I think the vice chair of JPR said it very clearly. It's a fundamental question. Do we want fewer guns and more voters, or do we want the potential of more guns and possible intimidation? Not guaranteed intimidation, but possible intimidation. I think that's the fundamental question.
Okay. Well, I think it's pretty presumptuous saying that what happened on January 6th, which we all condemn, and it was a horrible, horrible day in our nation's history.
Not everybody condemns.
That we assume that retired and off-duty police officers are going to be the bad guy in a situation like that. I just think I don't think there's data to prove that, and I think that's all presumptuous. So,
well, Senator, my understanding by reading the paper, there were FBI agents, there were police officers from New York and a number of other adjoining states who were part of that mob.
Well, as you know, people are also innocent until proven guilty. So, I mean, I think the jury's still out on that. But as far as our recent elections, what I'm getting is there's no data or massive complaints that people are intimidated or worried because off-duty or retired police officers may have had a concealed weapon at the precinct in 2020 or 2018. So I understand we'll have just a difference of opinion on that, but thank you for yielding for those questions. But ultimately, I would encourage a green vote on this amendment. I think it's reasonable. I think, an overwhelming majority, 99.99% of our law enforcement professionals, both retired and off-duty, are wonderful, and I would feel much safer myself in a precinct if something bad happened, knowing that one of these fine public servants were there ready to protect the fellow voters in that precinct. So I strongly encourage a green vote. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the senator from 28th District.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I have a question for the maker of the amendment.
Will the maker of the amendment yield? Appears so. Senator may proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. So we know that police officers, like all responsible citizens, are very much involved in the political process. So we know police officers, like regular citizens, support candidates of their choice. So if you have a retired officer who's supporting, say, a candidate at the polling location, be it a poll worker or whatever, displaying a badge, also a political sign. What would your amendment allow that to happen? With a concealed weapon, with a badge, holding political signs.
While they are actually a poll worker working for the Board of Elections, they can display nothing like that, nor could they, in my understanding, they cannot carry a gun either.
So that's not my question, Senator. My question is, if a retired officer, off-duty officer, is supporting a candidate, being a volunteer at the polls, not working for the Board of Elections, under your amendment, would that retired officer be allowed to display his or her badge and also have a concealed weapon along with polling material for his or her candidate?
If they were in 100 feet of the polling facility, they would be able to have a badge and a firearm.
And political signs.
Within 100 feet, they can't have a political sign.
Okay. So okay. So outside the 100 feet where we are allowed to campaign for our candidate, under your amendment, is that retired officer, off-duty officer, allowed to have a concealed weapon, displaying his or her badge, and doing their volunteer duty or paid duty, advocating for their candidate of their choice?
If the senator is asking if my amendment gives anything extra inside that 100 feet than what the current bill does, the answer is no.
Okay, so I understand. Maybe my question is not being understood. So, from a practical perspective, let me answer it this way. From a practical perspective, as a first-time candidate in 2018, I was on the receiving end of an off-duty officer who was also a volunteer firefighter at a polling location in my district where I was presenting my case to the voters outside the 100 feet, very much intimidating me. And so under this bill, I'm seeing, under your amendment, that same officer, if he had his weapon, would display his badge, working for my political opponent, and it seems that that would be allowed under your amendment.
So that answer is pretty clear. I'm wondering how the internal investigation went on that officer that intimidated you that day, because he clearly committed a violation. And this amendment is not to enhance or allow anything like that to occur.
Well, I'm saying that that officer and this law and this amendment was not enforced. So there was no badge displayed or anything like that. I don't know if he had a concealed weapon on him, but under this amendment, it's clear that if this passed, that officer volunteering for a candidate would be able to display his or her badge while campaigning for his or her favorite candidate and using the force of law to really advocate for his candidate. And I think that would be very intimidating to voters or other candidates, and it would, how should I say, discourage participation of voters in that location.
If that was allowed, or this amendment did that, that hypothetical question, yes, that would be scary. But this amendment, nor does this law allow some off-duty or retired officer to intimidate you or give any impression to be able to do that to any voter.
Okay, I understand. And so the intimidation is not the question with this amendment. The amendment is, my simple question is, if, and my analysis is, your amendment will allow an off-duty officer or retired officer who is campaigning for his or her favorite candidate would be able to display his or her badge while advocating for his or her candidate outside the 100 feet zone. So thank you, Mr. President, and for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the senator from District 6, followed by the vice chair of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of this amendment. As we know, every police officer and every off-duty police officer and every retired police officer had to qualify, okay, had to be trained, and had to be that type of a person to be a police officer. They just didn't go and say, okay, you're hired. They had to be trained. They had to be qualified. Then they protect and they serve. Or they did protect at one time and they served. And then at any given time, right, they are not supposed to take advantage of that position. As legislators, we are supposed to uphold the law, and we're supposed to not take advantage of our position. And that's exactly what I believe is just saying that this amendment gives that protection for that person to do exactly that, to have their card or their badge and not display it, and have the weapon that is concealed, and that is it. And I appreciate this amendment, and I believe we should support it. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Let's see, are there any senators? Senator, Vice Chair of the committee? Yes, Senator, may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. There are two facts that I want to share with colleagues before we vote on this amendment. First, and I appreciate the senator's comments about law enforcement officers, current law, and nothing in this amendment or this bill would change it. Current law, retired officers have no duty to act. So if they were at a polling place and there were a problem, they would, whether they were armed or unarmed, they would not be required to intervene. Second, I just want to be clear that the Vice Chair's legislation, for as creative and smart as he is, he's not unique. 10 other states have this verbiage in their laws. They are red and blue states. They are Arizona, California, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Ohio, South Carolina, and Texas, and then there's also DC and Puerto Rico. So this is not unique. This isn't cutting edge. This is keeping voters safe. I urge a red vote on this amendment.
Thank you, Senator. All right, are there any senators who have not yet spoken who wish to speak? If not, we'll go back to the maker of the amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. This amendment simply reinforces the whole term community policing. Things, obviously, what I've learned are different around the state. But from where I'm from, you pull up in a police car, the majority of the people there see that as someone who can help you, especially if something goes bad. Retired officers, they are given the opportunity to drive their police car off duty. That is their second vehicle in their family. When that officer goes to vote, he is required to have that gun. He or she is going to commit a departmental violation if they leave it in the car. What we're going to have at a polling precinct, if this amendment does not go through, we're going to have a bad act happens. Everybody sees and recognizes the officer. They're going to run to the officer, and hopefully they can keep up with him, because he's going to be running to his car to try to get his gun to be able to defend them and himself. I will be green on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Minority Whip.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I just want to clarify, this amendment is exactly the same as what we do for schools. It's literally cut and pasted. And the current law says this county school board can hire someone, just like this bill says, but the current law for schools, when children are in them, is exactly the same. Exactly the same. An off-duty police officer, a retired officer displaying credentials, the gun is not displayed, it's covered up, just like you see our troopers all around. This is exactly the same. So if we don't take this amendment, we're going to have this contradiction in the law that says an officer, and by the way, it was said they have to check in at the front. That's not in the law. That's a regulation that the Board of Education could adopt. This amendment is exactly the same as what we allow every day for our children at school. The law is exactly cut and pasted. No difference. And so if we don't take this, we're going to say we have one standard in the schools when children are walking around and another when there's adult voters walking around. And the reason why we made this exception for schools is we decided we wanted the good guys to have guns. Because when a bad guy shows up, he's not going to care about this law. When a bad guy shows up to kill people and shoot people at a polling place, you think he's going to go in and say, well, I'm going to look at the election law first and see? No. We need a good guy to stop the bad guys. And if we don't believe that police are the good guys anymore to stop bad guys with guns, then I don't know what we're going to do. But this is a terrible contradiction if we don't accept this amendment.
All right, Chair recognizes the Senator from Montgomery County.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. First, I think the analogy you heard before is like comparing apples and guava. But I think ultimately what we've seen in this election, at least this last November election, is record amount of people coming out to vote. And the most important thing was having access to a ballot and limiting voter intimidation. And one of the ways that could intimidate voters is to say that there'll be, regardless of who the person is, there'll be more guns in a voting place where people cast their ballots. So, Mr. President, colleagues, I reject this amendment. I understand the merits of it, but I reject it because I believe when it comes to exercising our democracy, it must be done in the least restricted environment where people feel less intimidated. They feel like they have more access to polling places. And I think if we add any individual that would have the ability to carry a firearm outside of a polling place, sends the wrong message and might limit people coming out to vote. So for those reasons, Mr. President, I would urge my colleagues to resist this amendment.
Thank you, Senator. I think we're getting close to knowing the issues here. Maybe some final words, Chair, for recognize the Senator from District 5.
Just wanted to follow up on the comments from my friend from Montgomery County and from the Senator from District 4. It doesn't sound like there was a lot of intimidation. We had record turnout. So just what we said, this law is not, the current status of a off-duty or retired police officer being able to carry on a school grounds anytime, including Election Day, doesn't seem to have caused any problems. And we don't know sometimes whether it may avert an issue that could come up. And I share the concerns that people have expressed on both sides of the aisle here about any sort of violence and including what's happened in the last year. There's been a lot of violence. There's been a lot of political violence. It is unacceptable. But that's not really the issue we have here today. This is just whether or not we have a common sense law for the entire year for off-duty police officers and retired police officers. And absolutely, if we have a situation where someone showed up wanting to do damage to people on Election Day, which is a hot spot and obviously an area we're always concerned about security, I definitely want us to have people who are the good guys that have the guns, not just the bad guy that shows up. So I support this amendment.
All right, questions on the amendment? Questions on the amendment? All in favor of the amendment, the Senator has requested a roll call vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote? Anyone wish to explain their vote? If not, the clerk will hold for just a moment to explain your vote. Chair recognizes the Senator from District 27.
Thank you, Mr. President. In a quick moment to explain my vote, I am not entering into my vote the notion of if something goes awry at the voting, at the polling station, at the polling location. I'm doing this because there are folks who are off duty, who are working crazy shifts and who want to go out and vote. And if they're off duty, they have their weapon. So I'm just doing that for those who are authorized to carry a weapon. And I am leaving out any emergency circumstance. I'm just want to make sure that folks are comfortable when they have the opportunity to vote en route to home or en route to work. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
President.
you, Senator. Thank you very much, Senator, for explaining the vote. We actually have to, the vote was closed a little bit early, so we have to reopen the voting board. So we're going to strike that vote to reopen the vote. It was closed before we saw that the senator was explaining his vote. So if the clerk could call the roll on the amendment.
Mr. President?
All right, does everyone record their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote? Anyone wish to explain their vote?
I'd just like to explain my vote. With
Senator, 2
the
minutes.
passage of this bill, we are now disarming off-duty police officers, retired police officers, from protecting people at a polling place. And we're now having a contradiction in our law where 364 days a year they can go into school with children under one law, and now in polling places another. This, if we're worried about people showing up with assault weapons and everything else, now we won't have police there to protect them. Removing police officers and good guys with guns protecting us is a bad thing, and that's why I'm proud to vote for this amendment. And this bill will remove police from protecting people at polling places.
So Chair recognizes the senator from District 34 has 2 minutes to explain his vote.
Thank you, Mr. President. My green vote reflects my firm and sincere belief that while an off-duty police officer or a retired police officer does not have a legal obligation to intervene to protect us under the law, that I know that these heroes, these true American heroes, would nevertheless step to the front at the risk of their own lives to save innocent people from harm. And we should be doing everything we can to enable their heroism and to support these brave people. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. All right, any further senators wish to explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 30 votes in the negative, the senator's amendment fails. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 10 is hereby ordered printed for third reader. Clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 283, Senator Elfreth, Student and Military Voter Empowerment Act. Question is on the adoption of the 2 amendments and the favorable report.
Question on the 2 amendments. Yes, Chair recognizes the senator from District 5.
Mr. President, I have, there are a couple of issues with this bill I wanted to raise, and I have a couple of amendments drafted. I know we haven't approved the favorable report yet. I was sort of message passed to me to maybe have that conversation, and then the committee would like to look at the amendments. Is this the time, or do we want to wait and approve the favorable report?
So there are amendments to the senator has amendments to the bill. The committee may want to take a look at the amendments.
Yes.
Why don't we special order the bill to the end of the calendar, or sort of?
Mr. President?
Chair, yes.
Would
Vice
the
Chair.
speaker
I would be happy to yield, yes.
Thank you, the senator from District 5. Mr. President, I was just handed these amendments during floor session by the sponsor of the bill. I didn't get them. Some of them seem inoffensive, but there are a couple of things that I think the committee should look at before we decide on the floor.
Why don't we just take it up tomorrow? We have plenty of time.
Thank you.
Do we want a special order until tomorrow?
Special order for tomorrow.
The committee can take
That's
it up.
fine with
Talk
me,
about
yes.
it today. Okay. Without objection.
I got them very late, Mr. President, so that's just
Fair
trying to-
enough. Fair enough. We got plenty of time. Without objection, we will special order the bill to the appropriate time tomorrow. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 787, Digital Advertising Gross Revenues Tax Exemption and Restriction. Questions on the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable report.
All right. Questions on the 2 committee amendments. Any discussion on the amendments? If not, yes. Chair recognizes the senator from 34th District.
Yeah, Mr. President, we had a discussion yesterday on the constitutionality of this bill and the amendments. At that time, we were presented with a letter from the Attorney General's office, stating that they found the bill to be constitutional. And in making that finding, they cited to the case of Exxon Corp versus Eagleton, which is a U.S. Supreme Court case from 1983. And upon reading that case, I find it's totally, it doesn't support the constitutionality of this bill in any way. That case says that if the government already has the right to institute price controls, such as for public utilities, that if they have those rights to institute price controls, then they would also have the right, as part of that, the corollary would say that they also have the right to restrict the utilities or what have you's ability to pass along taxes or fees, which would in essence just jack up the price controls. I mean, you'd undo the price control you just put in place. It doesn't in any way apply to the free market where there are not existing price controls. And just for the body's benefit, in that case we had Alabama has a fee, a tax, whatever you want to call it, for people who extract, or industries like Exxon who extract gas and oil from beneath Alabama. And their theory is that stuff belongs to the citizens of Alabama. And if you want it, you got to pay this tax. That's your share of it, Exxon. Well, then Exxon wanted to be able to pass that tax along back down to the people of Alabama. And the legislature says, well, then we'll be giving you our stuff for free, wouldn't we? So no, you can't pass it back down to the people of Alabama. You got to pay that one yourself. You can't jack the fee up, or you can't then jack up what you're going to sell back down to us folks and the people who live here in Alabama. Alabama controlled those prices. They determined what the price coming out of the ground was, and so it made sense. But in this case, we don't control, and we have no basis to control the costs of digital advertising, the prices that can be paid. And therefore, our ability to limit the taxed entity's ability to pass those taxes along does violate the Constitution. There's no basis for that. There's been no showing or demonstration that the prices that people pay for internet advertising somehow need to be controlled by the General Assembly or the legislature at any level. So I would just submit that this bill and the amendments are unconstitutional and ask for the matter to be either returned to committee or just simply reject the bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. It's an interesting question, the extraction of oil versus extraction of data. It's an interesting policy question. All right, question is on the amendments.
Mr. President.
Yes, Chair recognizes Senator from District 5.
I do have a couple of questions, and I think they're on the amendments relative to how the bill's been altered somewhat.
For the
could I ask would the floor leader yield for questions?
Senator, may proceed.
You bet.
So, as I looked at the bill over the last several hours, we have broadcast entity, and I was asking some questions yesterday about broadcasting, like I think I mentioned WJZ and WBAL-TV, and so they would not, their advertising rates are not affected, correct? Like they're not getting charged more. Trying to understand, it's broadcast would be exempted.
Yes.
Right? Okay. What is the difference? What are they going to be? I'm trying to think how to ask this the right way. What about cable networks? So, if
cable is different, you're right.
Okay, that's what, because the word broadcast kept sticking in my mind, and I was trying to figure out what am I missing.
Cable is cable, and broadcast is broadcast.
Right, because broadcast is obviously available at it is broadcast available for everybody, whereas cable you pay for it. So I mean, I guess how do we define broadcaster versus how do we define? I mean, how do you define broadcaster?
I'll give you the common sense answer. I think you described them. It's the local broadcast stations that we watch, where we see television. There's extensive case law, which I have no access to and have never read, involving the broadcast industry, because it's regulated at the federal level. So I'm sure there are very detailed definitions of broadcast that have been litigated, but I don't have them with me.
But this bill doesn't exempt, like, I don't know, TBS or ESPN or the cable, it doesn't exempt them from paying higher taxes for, or higher a tax on the
exempts
advertising.
companies that are predominantly broadcast or predominantly news media. That's what it does.
Why did we not just exempt out all television advertising? Because there's news. I guess I'm asking because some of the broadcast channels they provide a public benefit, right? But we have cable channels that are news or informational.
Right, but it's a different business model. They have subscriptions. They pay. Drawing a blank on the word, but they pay for access to public right-of-ways to be able to lay down their lines. I mean, they're just different businesses. And this bill addresses big tech. It addresses the handful of new players that are dominating a particular market. It doesn't address all the other ways people do business in the state of Maryland.
Well, and I understand that the goal is to address the big guys, but I feel like, based on what I'm reading, and I don't have the legal acumen of my friend from Harford County, but what
you
I'm
and I are
reading,
in the same boat there.
If you're reading and studying, it seems to me we're going to be increasing the price of cable television in Maryland, correct? Or at least the price of advertising on cable TV. I'm asking this because, much like the digital ad tax and the concerns we have, small businesses often will use targeted cable television advertising in a local area. So I'm just trying to understand why we wouldn't just want to exempt out. Why wouldn't we just want to exempt out all television advertising if we're exempting part of the television advertising? I know it's a different business model.
There was a concern expressed that we had not targeted it clearly enough, and this bill is designed to clarify that. That's what this provision, the major provision, that's what this provision does. It doesn't solve all the problems in the world related to every kind of business in Maryland.
Okay, but so it's fair to say probably that people's cable bills will even increase in Maryland correct? With the digital ad tax? Not because of this bill, but because of the digital ad tax?
No, that's not my point of view. And this issue of who's going to pay what, we debated extensively when we passed the original bill, when we override the governor's veto of the original bill. And I do not believe that's the case.
I don't have an amendment. I kind of wish that I did, but I don't have an amendment.
I'm so sorry.
Would the committee entertain an amendment to amend out? Yeah, I'm sure you're devastated. Would the committee entertain an amendment to amend out all television advertising, just so we're on an even playing field?
We had discussions about the cable industry. We had all those discussions in committee, and the committee's judgment was that this was the right way to go.
Okay. Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you.
I will sit here and ponder some more. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Senator from Montgomery County, Vice Chair of Finance.
Yeah, Mr. Florler, just a real question, very straight, simple, narrow. Yesterday, I talked about this idea of territorial pricing and how, in terms of enforcement.
Yep.
And how would we ever determine that it's not baked into a certain territory from an advertising standpoint? So when I look at the bill about, it's very specifically says that the entity that's impacted shall not directly pass on. So what is the sanction? In other words, if I'm a little skeptical about how we'll ever determine whether in fact this is being done, but if we somehow, some way determine that it is being done, the bill itself is silent on any kind of sanction or enforcement in that regard, from a deterrent standpoint.
The gentleman is correct, and we may need to come back in the future and fix that.
Okay, so this is an emergency bill, so it comes into effect, an entity completely ignores the law that we're about to pass, and you're saying we don't have anything that indicates that there's a sanction?
It's silent on that question.
Okay. Is there a reason that we would not have specified some deterrent provision to just...
We presume people will obey the law, and we put sanctions in when we're concerned about people not obeying the law. I assure you, I was in all the hearings on this, all the discussion. The question of these companies illegally violating the law didn't come up, but it's a good question.
Well, you say illegal. It's not a criminal. It wouldn't be a criminal sanction, right? We're talking about civil. Okay. I don't want to belabor the point. I'm just making it.
No, if they don't follow the law, we would have to deal with it. But that is not an issue that we debated in the committee.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right. Further discussion on the committee amendments. Chair recognizes Senator from the Upper Eastern Shore.
Thank you, Mr. President. The floor leader would continue to yield. Wanted to follow up on the comments you were making with my colleague here about the discussions that occurred with the broadcast entities. When did that discussion occur? Because obviously that's new language. That is the bill. That wasn't an amendment that the committee just put on. So when was the time that was discussed to include that in the introduced bill?
Let's start again. When did members of the committee have discussions with folks in the broadcast and news industries about this
Correct.
language?
At some time, it was decided to introduce a bill that exempted broadcast entities.
Yes.
What triggered that?
Concern that the bill that was passed, that we overrode the governor's veto on, was not clear enough about that. The issue was discussed last year. I remember the discussions about it last year.
Okay, that's what I was asking. So that was discussed last year, but it just
last
didn't...
year, and we thought it was clear enough, and then we decided it wasn't clear enough.
Okay, but does that, again, in following up to what was just asked, does that then say, depending on what channel you're watching, an ad can either be taxed or not taxed?
It goes back to the question of the definition of broadcast. Broadcast is a particular business model, a particular technology. That's all I can tell you.
So a local broadcast entity, as was stated, Channel 11, if I'm watching that, I would see ads that have not been taxed. If I were watching a cable channel...
With all due respect, the ads are not being taxed. The entity is being taxed on their gross receipts. So, yes, the tax would not apply to Channel 11, the company, right?
Okay, and so then what entities would the tax be applied to?
It would apply to those who gross a minimum of over $100 million and operate in the state of Maryland.
So when it comes to broadcasting, I mean, we all understood the digital aspect of that in the entities that are there. When it comes to broadcasting entities, what entities do we think are then targeted by the bill? What's left of the bill after this?
Who's going to pay the tax? Again, it's probably the estimate last year, the estimate this year. We'll see how the world changes. We think it's probably a dozen companies in the world. They are not your local television stations. They are not your local newspapers. They have names like Facebook and Google.
I understand those from digital. I'm trying to get to the point of who are the broadcast entities that we'd be watching, that this bill is specifically making sure that it's clarifying that we're eliminating local broadcast entities so that XYZ companies remain.
All I can tell you is, and I can't pick it up right now, but there is a list of local broadcast companies that submitted testimony in support of this bill. They believe that this clarifies it.
Right, okay. I appreciate it. I'm just trying to, again, get to who we think would end up paying the tax, which large companies would pay it. And we know from the digital side.
Big tech companies
we understand that.
Would pay it.
But for some reason, we thought it very specific to address broadcast entities in this bill.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering who it pulled out and who it left in.
Okay, let me summarize that.
Okay.
Who would end up paying the tax is a handful of big tech companies with names that we all recognize.
Right.
That's who would pay the tax. The people who would not pay the tax are our local broadcast television stations, our local broadcast radio stations, and our local newspapers. That's a common sense way to think about it.
Okay, I think I understand that. I did mention yesterday the fiscal note with regards to pulling out this advertising. Again, we don't know the impact of the fiscal note. I mean, the fiscal writers were able to determine that this bill, as passed, which was overridden the governor's veto, would generate $250 million.
That's the estimate, exactly.
That's the estimate. But the fiscal writers were not able to determine that this bill, by eliminating certain broadcast companies, would reduce that fiscal note or reduce that estimate?
Let me put it this way. By definition, this bill will reduce revenue collections if we don't pass the bill. This is a tax cut bill. Think of it that way. Yeah. How much the tax cut is, as we all deal with fiscal notes, in this case, they found very hard to determine for two reasons. But the most important one is their estimate last year did not assume that we were including broadcasting and newspapers in it. And so it's a clarification issue. So whatever effect it has, it will be a lower fiscal note. It's a tax cut. But how much that is, or could be, or might be, or could have been, they can't estimate. Sorry.
All right, now, I'm just interested. I mean, the heavy lift was already done. The bill was passed last year. The efforts to override the governor's veto were put in place this year. All of that work was done, and yet we found it very important to specifically exclude a group without knowing the fiscal impact after all of this work has been done. It's just intriguing to me on why we've done this. I mean, overall, the bill is, again, a very interesting concept. I would agree with my colleagues. I would love to see this passed on to other companies and let them pay the tax, and businesses and customers not have to pay taxes. That'd be great. It's interesting that we found it that important to exclude this group. So that's all my questions. I appreciate your time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Chair recognizes Senator from District 30.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speaking as a committee member here, this is a belts and suspenders kind of bill. We've talked about that a couple times. The original legislative intent of the bill we passed last year and overrode just a few weeks back was to make sure that we are targeting those corporations that are not in Maryland. They're not from Maryland. They're not adding to our civic infrastructure at all. Those corporations that are grossing over $100 million a year, we're protecting our small businesses from those corporations and from passing the tax back down. The vice chair of the committee has done an excellent job explaining the nitty-gritty of this bill, but I want to bring us back to the original legislative intent, which is about protecting Maryland's small businesses. This is a belts and suspenders approach to make sure that the intent we had last year is actually being seen through, and we're protecting Maryland's small businesses. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Senator from the 33rd District.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question for the floor leader.
Senator may proceed.
Thank you.
Yes,
Mr.
sir.
Vice Chairman, good to see you.
Good to see you, too. And thank you for your help this morning with the pastor.
This is an interesting bill. Now, the bill says that whoever pays the tax may not separately identify the tax charged in any way in their operation within Maryland. Is that correct?
Essentially.
But there's no restriction for them to take the tax and build it into the cost of their doing business, which might translate to slightly higher prices across the United States.
Is that a question?
Is that accurate, that there's no restriction for them to increase their prices?
There's no price control in this legislation.
Yeah, okay. Now, is Maryland the only state that has moved this bill forward?
They're moving in other states, but to my knowledge, we're the first ones that passed it.
Okay. And the amendment I found interesting because for the first time in the discussion of the bill, it brings in tobacco.
No. The bill, this bill, well, I mean, first time compared to when? I'm not quick. What's the question exactly?
Senate Bill 787.
Yeah.
The name of the title has been changed.
Those provisions in this bill that I talked about yesterday or the day before. One set of provisions applies to the tobacco tax, and the other set of provisions applies to the big tech tax. It's two kinds of taxes in one bill.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Mr. President.
All right. Chair recognizes the Senator from the 47th District.
Will floor leader yield for a question?
Will floor leader yield? Senator may proceed.
Yes, sir.
I'm confused. Literally, I'm confused.
Okay.
Wouldn't this be providing tax relief to small businesses here in Maryland?
Well, the entire concept is focused there, of course. This specific bill,
that's what I'm talking
clarified, would not have to pay the tax.
Right,
Yes.
because I mean, as it stands right now, there was some confusion about that, and so this is actually clarifying.
Yes.
And would provide some relief then and some clarity for these Maryland businesses who would not then be subject to this tax. Is that correct?
Well, I think you've seen the light, Senator. I do not think you're confused anymore.
Am I starting to understand?
You're totally understanding. You hit the nail on the head.
All right, I think I understand now. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Glad we could get that point of clarity. Let's see, Chair recognizes Senator from the 38th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. If the
Sure.
floor leader could rise.
Senator may
And
proceed.
I'm just actually going off of a previous question. I thought I was following along, and then about the questions about tobacco, because I went and I pulled up the amendment, and I was trying to understand, just following the amendment and the discussion we've been having, if you could just walk me through the sections that apply to tobacco.
Yeah, sure. The provisions dealing with tobacco simply deal with updating dates, because when the original law was passed last year, it assumed that the governor would not veto it. When the governor vetoed it, and we came back and overrid it, it pushes everything back. That's all it does.
So the amendments, I'm just looking at the actual language. It changes the title to do that, and then changes the date. Is that how we're doing that?
That's the essence of it. Yeah, that's the essence of it. Yes.
So it changes it from what date to what date?
I apologize. I can't see it, Mr. Chairman. Let me pull up my copy of the bill.
Chair recognizes Chair of the Committee.
Yeah, please. Go ahead.
July 1st, 2020 to March 14th, 2021.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
All right. Chair recognizes the Senator from District 5.
Thank you, Mr. President. The discussion has prompted maybe another question, but I want to make a statement first. I think I understand the goal of trying to keep a tax from being passed on. I think the questions that some of us have is whether this bill will really accomplish that goal. So that's one point of clarification on the points of clarification we've heard. There's a concern in my mind that we say you can't pass it along as a surcharge, but I don't know that we can really keep it from being passed along. But maybe we can, and I'll continue to sort of puzzle through that as I look at this. I do have a question for the floor leader, because going back to our discussion about who's exempted and who's not, and I do understand I understand the argument about the cable being a different a different business model, but so we have the exemption for broadcast and for newspapers in here, but we're only taxing entities that make over $100 million, correct, in the bill?
Yes.
Well, if a newspaper or there are out-of-state corporations that own local newspapers.
Yeah, that's the complexity. That's where there was.
So why are we exempting them if they're making over $100 million?
Because the intent of the original bill that this is amending was to take the handful of big tech companies that are not paying their fair share in Maryland and bring them into the social contract in Maryland so they pay their fair share. The national companies that own local newspapers, they're paying their fair share in Maryland now. They pay property tax. We went through that all the other day. So the issue is making everybody pay their fair share and not put some people paying more than they should.
But those that own both broadcast entities and newspapers were saying they pay their fair share. But I know one very large newspaper in the state that now is going to be going somewhere else to be owned by. So they actually would be out of this anyway because they're not owned by an out-of-state corporation, or at least they won't be. But a lot of media companies that own newspapers and TV stations or radio stations, they're in places that are renting some of those spaces. It's not always paying property
That's all
tax.
true. That's all true. But it's just a different business model. It's a different industry essentially. And the view of the committee was the point of all this was to focus on the handful of big tech companies that were escaping paying their fair share. That's all this is about.
Okay. Thank you for answering.
Thank you very much.
All right. Question is on the two committee amendments.
Mr. President, just I
yes,
think again here on second reading, I know
Oh,
we're going to move
amendment.
this to third, and not to get into third reading debate. I think just some of us are wrestling with whether this is. We understand the intention of trying to protect folks, but we also I'm just concerned a little bit about the kind of the winners and losers mindset, picking winners and losers necessarily. So I'm just trying to understand it better. I thank you for the indulgence on asking the questions.
Thank you, Senator. All right, on the committee amendments, any further discussion? If not, All in favor of the amendment say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The two committee amendments are adopted. Question now is on the favorable committee.
It's always a pleasure talking with you.
Same here.
So I'm just trying to get to the high level here. And look, we support a tax cut and we appreciate that. So let me put that out in front. So I'm just trying to get to the crux of the bill from a high level without getting all the weeds. So one portion of this is basically carving out a certain group of corporations or whatever they are that were originally required to pay the tax, and this is going to say this group will no longer be in that bill. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that this bill says they can't directly pass it on to the customer under specified situations. That basically, besides the amendment with the tobacco, did I get that right?
The only, and this is a technical nitpick here, but our view is this is a clarification of the bill that became law, that it was unclear whether the broadcast and local newspapers were covered, but otherwise I agree with you.
Okay, so, and we've heard debate on this, on the previous override veto, that this bill was coming. And one of the assertions was that we didn't want to pass this tax that we're trying to get to the big tech on to small businesses. So I'm looking at the language and I'm trying to find out what the intent is of the language that says that they can't pass that on directly, but they specify, they say only in a separate fee, surcharge, or line item, but there's no prohibition of other ways of putting that in, such as the senator from District 15, I believe, in the sense that, it's very targeted. So Maryland, they could bake in those costs the very next day and say, look, it's a extra $10 or whatever, we're going to charge Maryland those rates. There is no prohibition in the bill that would stop that, correct?
Well, this is the discussion that the senator from the 34th and I had on the veto override. And we talked a lot about economic theory and tax incidence and all that kind of stuff. It is our intent that it not be passed on. It is our belief it will not be passed on. But there are people who are concerned that the companies might add on a surcharge of some kind, and therefore we thought it made sense, belt and suspenders, to provide that provision.
And I appreciate the intent, but I'm looking at the bill as far as, will small businesses potentially absorb this tax? Is there anything in this bill that would prohibit a Google or other company from raising their advertising and passing it on to small businesses? Is there anything in this bill that would prohibit that?
As we discussed the other day at great length, the structure of the marketplace, given their market power, is such that it is my view that they will not be able to pass it on. There are people on your side of the aisle have a different point of view, and I respect that.
Yeah, but I want to talk, and I'm just trying to look at the bill. I understand there's difference of opinions, but in this bill, can you show me where a small business is shown that they will not get that tax passed on through higher cost? Because that's been the assertion, that we're not going to pass it on to small businesses. And I see three specific cases. You can't do a separate fee, you can't put in a surcharge, and you can't have a line item. But there's nothing in, just one second, there's nothing in there that says Google or Facebook can't say, in Maryland, we're going to raise your ad rates because we got a tax. And I'm just asking a simple question. Is there anything in this bill that prohibits that?
The simple answer is that this provision in particular, the bill in general, was drafted with the advice of the Attorney General's office. And it is their view that this was the way to do it. And that's why we drafted it the way we did.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is the way they intended to do it, they got it. But there's really nothing in here that will not prohibit that. So let me just ask you a question about the target of this. I know the target is big tech. And we've heard that, they make gobs of money and they should pay their fair share. And there's a handful of entities that this is taking out. And these are entities that are, I'm assuming, making over $100 million at least, would be taken out because of this bill being put in. Do we know how many entities this is going to affect, roughly, that will be excluded from the tax?
I don't have the number, but it's a couple of dozen, basically.
A couple of dozen. And do you know how many are in Maryland?
Well, it's related to Maryland, so by definition, if they're not in Maryland, they're not an issue anyway.
I mean, located in Maryland. Because under this bill, they don't have to be located in Maryland. Is that correct?
No. On the broadcasting and newspaper side of it, maybe I'm misunderstanding the question. Try again.
So corporations can be outside of our state and
Yes.
own a bunch of different stations
Yes,
and things like
absolutely.
that, and they pay their taxes in their
Yes.
states. This would exempt them in the broadcast and news.
It would
outlet.
clarify that the bill we passed and the governor vetoed, and we overrode the veto, was intended at a small group of big tech companies and not intended to deal with our local newspapers and our local television radio stations. I don't know how I can be clearer
Okay.
than that.
Let me ask a different question then. I've heard the assertion that we want these big profit revenues to pay their fair share. The companies that we are exempting in this bill, and I won't mention them by name, but I know at least of one in our state has revenues over $4 billion annually. They have almost $250 million profit. So I guess I'm just going to the intent. Why are we singling out big tech to pay their fair share, but other companies that are doing really well, billions of dollars of revenues, hundreds of millions of dollars of profit? And while I appreciate the tax cut, I'm just looking at the intent. Why are we saying some of these really big revenue companies have to pay extra tax, but other of these really big companies that are making gobs of money, they don't have to pay tax?
Well, they do have to pay tax, but not in this bill. Senator, if you believe that the broadcasting companies and the newspapers in Maryland are not paying their fair share, I encourage you to introduce a bill to deal with that issue. And I'm sure the committee will be happy to consider it.
Oh, I appreciate it. We disagree on that. I was looking to the intent of the bill. Why? Because it was proposed out here, everybody should pay their fair share, especially those ones that are paying these huge amounts, are getting revenues, hundreds of millions of dollars of profit. And this bill, while I appreciate one part taken out, I like them all taken out, why we're exempting these really profitable companies from paying the tax when the goal of this was that these big raising monies should pay their fair share? Why shouldn't they pay their fair share?
As I said, if you don't think they're paying their fair share, we would love to see your bill.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the senator from the 45th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. I guess I got a couple questions for the
floor leader.
Floor leader.
Senator may proceed.
You know, I got a number of calls on this bill, and I remember when we did this bill and what the intent of the original bill was. But I remember getting a call from a family-owned newspaper, over 100 years, minority newspaper that still exists to this day. And this bill has the impact on a number of small businesses. Is that correct?
You're talking about this bill.
This bill,
Horace,
the corrective, this bill,
This
which
bill
just
would
clarifies.
make absolutely clear the kind of newspaper you're talking about would not be subject to tax.
Say that again?
This bill makes clear the kind of newspaper you're talking about would not be subject to the tax.
I just wanted to make sure because, like I said, we've got a number of these folks, and it's not that many that's left, and we want to make sure that we're still protecting these small minority newspapers that exist, that cater to our communities, and making sure that there's clarity with the bill that we passed and what that intent was. Thank you again.
Amen.
All right. Any further discussion on the report? If not, all in favor of the report say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Chair recognizes the minority leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Read the number.
Amendment? Yes, please.
It is SB 0787/233-429/1.
429. All right. Do we have it? Give us 1 second, Senator. Senator may proceed.
Thank you. And so what this amendment is really trying to target the small businesses, as the senator from Baltimore City just mentioned. Under the current bill, the exemption of taxes are only for companies making over $100 million annually. Those are not small businesses. That's the only impact that tax reduction is having on $100 million or more. Under the current language in here, There is no guarantee that small businesses will not eat this cost or even pass it on to their customers. What this bill says, and I would encourage you to look at the language and not just the answers on the floor, it says you may not directly pass this tax on to customers in 3 conditions, and only 3 conditions: a separate fee, a surcharge, or a line item veto. Small businesses still can get baked-in costs, as we've heard here, that they can determine with Maryland. They can come in and say, you know what, they just raised our taxes by X amount, we're going to pass that on to the customer. And I hear the intent, we don't want to pass this on to small businesses. This is the amendment that will ensure that they're not passed on. One, by saying not only direct, but indirectly you can't pass it on. And then the other point, which is important too, is not limiting to those to recoup the taxes. Now, if economic situation changes, they can do it for that reason, but they can't pass it on. This is an amendment that says we don't want the tax that is supposed to go to the big techs to come down to the small business. And I would urge your vote on that. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the floor leader.
Thank you very much, and I thank the sponsor for bringing me the amendment. I rise in opposition to the amendment simply because the language that's in the bill was drafted in consultation with the Attorney General's office. It is their view that that was the right way to do it, and I urge a red vote.
Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 33rd District.
Thank you very much. A question for the floor leader.
Thank you.
In business, there's a lot of ways to measure volume, sales, profit, before tax, after tax. Just so the body knows, the original bill identified gross receipts.
Absolutely, thank you.
Not earnings.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Vice Chairman. I rise to speak in favor of the amendment, Mr. President. I've been convinced by the Vice Chairman that this is a great bill, that this I'm going to vote green for. But we also have to look at the underlying possibilities, because this is what's going to happen. If we are the leader in the United States and the first to put this in effect, 49 other states will fall in line to the leadership of this body. And all it's going to do is raise that cost to everybody in the United States. If we are truly intent on protecting our small businesses and ultimately the consumers who pay the price, this is a good amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Further discussion. Chair recognizes the senator from the 38th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was just going to ask my colleagues, and I was actually a little surprised that this would not be accepted as a friendly amendment. And I say that because one word, that indirectly, that is what's going to provide the protection for our small businesses. And when we do talk to our small businesses, especially during COVID-19, any type of relief is helpful to them. Some of them are just, they're barely making it. So when we can basically accept a friendly amendment, put the indirectly in there, do exactly what you say is the intention of the bill. So I urge my colleagues to accept this as a friendly amendment and to vote yes and give our small businesses that additional protection that you said the intention of the bill is for anyway.
Chair recognizes the senator from the 25th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to speak in opposition to this amendment. The floor leader has clearly stated that the committee worked in consultation with the attorneys general, and to adopt this amendment might put the bill in a posture where it is no longer implementable and no longer legal. So I would ask my colleagues to join me in opposing this amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Any further discussion on the amendment? All in favor of the amendment, say aye. Opposed, nay. Amendment.
I'd like a roll call if you don't mind.
Senator requests a roll call. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote? Explain their vote? Chair, in explaining his vote, just to be very, very clear, the whole purpose of this bill is to ensure that Maryland businesses are protected. On advice from the Attorney General's office, we need to make sure that the protection is lawful and legal and constitutional. voting for an amendment like this would put Maryland businesses at risk. It would jeopardize anything, the protection that we don't believe that these companies could do anyway, but it would take this protection and undermine it entirely. So voting for this amendment essentially says, at the end of the day, that willing to risk any protections to Maryland businesses for a message. I think that the right vote is to move forward and make sure that Maryland businesses continue to compete in the 21st century. And so for that reason, I am voting against this amendment. Any further? Senator, yes, Chair recognizes the Minority Leader. Has 2 minutes to explain his vote.
Explain my vote. This is a very simple amendment. It currently says you can't directly pass this on in certain situations. It's very clear to say you can't directly or indirectly, and it also says you can't bake in these other things. This is a way we can tell small business that we have it. If they have a problem with it later, we can deal with it, but this at least puts protections that small businesses don't have in this bill. Thank you.
Clerk will take the call. With 31 votes in the negative, this amendment fails. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 787 is hereby ordered printed for third reader. All right, we've got some third readers. Let's do a quorum call before. Do we have third? We have special order calendar. Apologies. Let's do the special order calendar. This is calendar number 21. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 31, Senator Washington, Electricity and Gas Energy Suppliers Supply Offers. Question is on the adoption of the 2 committee amendments and the favorable report.
All right. Questions on the 2 committee amendments? Yes, Chair recognizes the Vice Chair of the committee.
Yes, Mr. President. Last week we had a discussion about the bill, and it was before we adopted, if you recall, the committee report. Sponsor, myself, we had a bit of a back and forth. So we did, at that time, our committee amendments at that time were rooted in the fact that the Public Service Commission had reservations and had come in opposition. And now the PSC has come in a neutral position. They've actually reversed course and come into a neutral position. So after some back and forth with the sponsor, we have a substitute set of committee amendments. So, Mr. President, I would ask that we withdraw these amendments, and if I might explain the substitute amendments, which I think resolve the concerns raised by the sponsor, and it also incorporates some amendments that the committee had put in the first time around. So with that, do you want to let's start with withdraw the amendments on the table.
So the floor leader has moved to withdraw the committee amendments. Are there any objections to the withdrawal of the committee amendments? Seeing none, the committee amendments are now withdrawn. The senator has substitute committee amendments.
Correct. So, Mr. President, under the substitute committee amendments...
Can the senator read the number of the substitute?
Okay.
Well, 974. Do we have these? Are they on the system now? Okay, Senator may proceed.
We're good. Okay. Senate Bill, under the substitute committee amendment, Senate Bill 31 allows a third party, a retail supplier of electricity or natural gas to provide service to households that receive certain state energy assistance only if the supply offer is approved by the Public Service Commission. The offer must commit to charging at or below the standard office service price and may not include a termination fee. The Public Service Commission must also establish a certain customer education program, and the Office of Home Energy Programs is required to provide certain education materials to customers. Amendment number 1 is technical. Amendment number 2 delays the implementation of the bill's requirements by 1 year to January 1, 2023, removes a requirement to conduct certain annual test cases, establishes the education program requirements, and makes other clarifying changes. Mr. President, I'd move these substitute amendments and adoption of the favorable committee report.
Floor leader moves for the adoption of the replacement substitute committee amendments. Any discussion? Yes, Chair recognizes the sponsor of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to confirm, and I appreciate working with the committee, these are the amendments offered by the sponsor during the bill hearing? The answer would be yes, I think.
Is that a question for the floor leader?
The answer is...
sorry, it's a question to the floor leader.
Oh, yes. The answer is yes, plus the educational amendments that the committee itself put on. So it's both. And I would also add these, your sponsor amendments are also the same as the amendments put on in the House, and that's what caused the reversal by the Public Service Commission from their opposition, which is what we heard, to a neutral position, which has prompted this. So the answer to that is it's yes, plus the education provisions that we had put on as a committee.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, these, I just wanted to speak on them. I support these amendments. Again, these were amendments, the first two amendments were offered during the bill hearing, and again, in collaboration with the other side that we've been working from the beginning. And then also, I think it's a very good idea that the committee added the educational component. I think that that improves the bill. And again, I'll be supporting this amendment and approve the favorable support.
Thank you, Senator. All right, any further discussion on the amendments? If not, all in favor of the substitute amendments say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The substitute amendments are adopted. Question now is on the favorable committee report as amended. Any discussion? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report as amended is adopted. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 31 is hereby ordered printed for third reader. So Senator Maryland right there. Find a way to get through, end up with a better product in the end. All right, clerk, read the next bill.
Senate Bill 499, Senator Lamb, Prohibition on Vending Machine Sales of Drugs and Medicines, repeal. Question is on the adoption of the favorable report.
All right, question is on the adoption of the favorable report. Any discussion on the favorable report? If not, all in favor of the report say aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The favorable committee report is adopted. Are there any amendments to the bill or its title? Chair recognizes the minority whip. Has an amendment?
Yes, I do. The amendment is 503223/1.
All right, give us just one moment, Senator.
And just to expedite things, Mr. President, if I can maybe just start talking a
There we
little
go.
bit while
It's
people
up.
pull it up.
Senator, may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. So the justification for the bill, and I agree totally with the intent of the bill, what was said to me on the floor, why they wanted it. I understand why the committee voted it out unanimously, because the intent is correct. I'm just concerned that when I read the bill and I looked at the testimony, the way the bill is drafted is my concern, in that the bill, this bill seeks to, as we were said on the floor, deal with over-the-counter drugs, putting them into a vending machine. The bill as it's currently drafted, though, strikes 21-111 of the Health General article, which includes essentially all the regulations for what you can put in a vending machine for prescription, non-prescription, everything else. So my concern is, if you just strike that, and you're not adding new guidance, which just doesn't have, it leaves it very broad. So I did reach out to the Attorney General and ask for an opinion. And the opinion was, if the intent of the bill is to repeal the prohibition against the sale or distribution of exclusively non-prescription drugs or medicines through a vending machine, as expressed by both the sponsors of Senate Bill 499 and HB 107 at their respective bill hearings, the General Assembly may want to consider making that intent clear. Because like I said, it just currently strikes the total prohibition on prescription drugs and everything else in vending machines. And now the letter's pretty long, and I'm sure the committee and everybody else will cite the scope of practices and why this isn't needed. But if you go to the very bottom of the AG letter that I received, they say after you go through all the scope practices, all the other laws, they say despite these various scope practice requirements on the distribution of prescribed drugs, I've not found any specific federal regulations or state restrictions aside from existing 21-111, which this bill's going to strike out, that prohibit dispensing of prescription drugs by means of a vending machine. In theory, such a vending machine could be used to lawfully dispense prescription drugs under very limited circumstances within scope of pharmacy, on so on and so forth. So, the amendment I'm offering, I think this is quite frankly clarifying, because I don't think the intent from what was said on the floor and what was testified in the committee was ever to deal with prescription drugs. It was over-the-counter drugs. And so it just simply says that the Secretary shall develop regulations for over-the-counter non-prescription drug medicines. And I will offer the amendment. I quite frankly don't know why it's controversial, because I listened to the sponsor, what he has said. I'm trying to draft something explicit to do what the bill was testified to was going to do on the floor, and I fear without this amendment, we are striking the complete regulation on putting whatever we want in vending machines. I mean, that's not good law. I feel it was not drafted well to what the sponsor wants, so I would offer the amendment.
All right. Chair recognizes the floor leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do appreciate the sponsor's attempt to help the committee out with the drafting of the bill and the amendments and such. Let me just make a few quick points. First of all, just to remind or refresh the memory of the body, what we're trying to do is put ourselves in line with what 46 other states already do, which is allow over-the-counter, FDA-approved products in a vending machine, just like you could get at your local pharmacy, Walgreens, CVS, et cetera, and all that. Now, with respect to the Attorney General's opinion, gentleman, sponsor of the amendment, did very selectively read a couple of provisions. One, which said the General Assembly may want to consider making the intent clear. What the gentleman did not talk about, and he sort of telegraphed what I'm going to say, is the Attorney General goes further and elaborates that we have a whole body of, in the health occupations article, about scope of practice. We have a body of federal law. We have a body of state law dealing with that, which makes this amendment unnecessary in terms of what's behind the counter, what's over the counter. I mean, we don't have any specific provisions right now about, if you go into the local pharmacy, what's over the counter, what's not. That's really not the point. I just want to make 2 points about the amendment specifically. So if you look at the amendment, it does say, it has one provision, but then it says, and this is, I think, the more troubling part, it says the secretary, it's going to be up to the secretary to adopt regulations regarding which non-prescription drugs, medicines will make its way into these vending machines. Now, for those of you who don't like regulation, no other state of those 46 I just mentioned leave it up to the Secretary of Health or an unelected, and we don't know who the Secretary of Health will be, the next governor, to make the determination what should be in the vending machines. And in some cases, of course, we're talking about underserved communities, rural communities. This is about health care. And, if it's good enough to get it in the local pharmacy over the counter, it should be good enough to get in the vending machine. That's what this bill is about. Put those two on equal parity access. And so if you want to send that to a political appointee to make those calls, then this amendment is for you. I don't think that's necessarily a good idea, Mr. President. And so for those reasons, I don't think the amendment is necessary at all. I think, again, we would be the most regulated state in the nation in this very specific point. The laws are on the books that exist for all the pharmacies and all the rest. The same laws will apply here to the vending machine. And with that, I'd ask the body to resist this amendment.
All right. Any further discussion on the amendment? Anyone wish to speak that has not yet spoken? If not, Chair recognizes the maker of the amendment.
Yeah, I'll just say, without this amendment, we will be different than any other state because we'll have zero guardrails whatsoever to what you can put in a vending machine as far as pharmaceuticals and drugs. I just think that's a step too far. And quite frankly, the law already says that a secretary we are striking that he can exempt certain products. So we do give the secretary latitude. We're removing that, though, and there is essentially no regulation now. So I'd offer the amendment. I think it's common sense. Without this, we have no idea, and no one can answer what we're going to be putting into vending machines. We've had a lot of problems in this state with prescription drug abuse, prescription drug pill mills, and the fact that we're just going to pass without this amendment, this bill will just completely remove restrictions on what you put in vending machines to a state that has struggled with pill mills and everything else. I think we should have some guardrails. That's why I'm saying that the bill was drafted wrong in the first place, and we should never remove completely the restrictions of what drugs we put in vending machines. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the chair of the committee.
Okay. Colleagues, I think the maker of the amendment means well, but he doesn't understand the bill nor what the status quo is. Right now, over the counter, without having to go through anything and without a prescription, there are a lot of things that the FDA has left in that posture. If it can be sold right now over the counter, if I can walk in, or you can walk into the store or to a pharmacy and pick it up now and pay the person at the register for it and walk away, you now could do it with a vending machine. That's all. Anything that requires a prescription or requires you going to the pharmacist to get assistance with it, it still would be done that way. So what it really does do for areas that are underserved, for areas where they're rural or they're in low-income communities where you can't, you don't have a lot of assistance for getting what you need. Now you don't have to have the hassle or take off from work or wait for the daytime to go in to get it when you could simply get it out of the vending machine. Thank you.
All right, questions on the amendment? Chair recognizes the Vice Chair of the committee.
Yeah, just to respond to the sponsor's last point about no guardrails. Okay, that's absolutely not the case. The same AG opinion that the gentleman references, there is a very detailed set of guardrails in terms of scope of practice in the health occupations article, the Board of Physicians, a very robust process that very limits exactly what is behind the counter, what's over the counter, and in turn, then what can make its way into the vending machine. We've got a very robust set of guardrails in place under current Maryland regulations. So with that, I'd urge again a red vote on the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. All right, questions on the amendment? Senator has requested a roll call vote. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 32 votes in the negative, the senator's amendment fails. Are there any further amendments to the bill or its title? Seeing none, Senate Bill 499 is hereby ordered printed for third reader. All right, quorum call before third reader calendar.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their presence? If so, the clerk will take the call. With 47 members in the chamber, bills on here, this is calendar 18. Clerk will read the first bill.
Senate Bill 77, Senator Griffith, Energy Efficiency Net Zero Homes Contract Preferences.
Senate Bill 77 is on third reader for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 47 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 77, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 93, Senator Griffith, Business, Occupations, and Professions, Architect, Scope of Licensure.
Senate Bill 93 is on third reader for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 47 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 93, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 418, Senator Pinsky, Maryland Energy Administration, Energy and Water Efficiency Standards Alterations.
Senate Bill 418 is on third reader for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 47 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 418, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 427, Senator Elfreth, Public Schools Provision of Menstrual Hygiene Products Requirement.
Senate Bill 427 is on third reader for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 47 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 427, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 442, Senator Klossmeyer, Aquaculture Coordinating Council, application of tidal wetlands permit requirements to aquaculture operations study. This is an emergency bill.
Senate Bill 442 is on third reader for final passage. Senators, this is an emergency bill. Any discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 47 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 442, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 448, Senator Edwards, County Board of Education, Student Transportation, Vehicles, and Report.
Senate Bill 448 is on third reader for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President?
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 47 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 448, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 476, Senator Eckert, Health Occupations, Nurses, Delegation of Tasks.
Senate Bill 446 is on third reader for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 47 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 476, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 596, Senator Washington, Election Law, Early Voting Centers, Hours of Operation.
Senate Bill 596 is on third reader for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 47 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 596, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 630, Senator Ferguson, Education Adult High School Pilot Program Funding and Grants.
Senate Bill 630 is on third reader for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 47 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 630, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 779, Senator Elfrith, Maryland 529 Program, Board Authority and State Contribution Alterations.
Senate Bill 779 is on third reader for final passage. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 47 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 779, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 877, the President Annual Corrective Bill. This is an emergency bill.
Senate Bill 877 is on third reader for final passage. Any discussion? If not, the clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 47 votes in the affirmative, Senate Bill 877, having received a constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
Senate Bill 878, the President Annual Curative Bill, emergency bill.
Senate Bill 878 is on third reader for final passage. It's an emergency bill. Any discussion? If not, clerk will call the roll.
Mr. President,
Has everyone recorded their vote? Anyone wish to change their vote, explain their vote? If not, the clerk will take the call. With 46 votes in the affirmative, and Senate Bill 878 having received a constitutional majority, the bill is passed. All right, the desk is clear. Desk is clear. Is there anybody that would like to jump in on that corrective bill? No? Okay. All right. Yes, Chair recognizes the senator from Baltimore and Howard counties.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to be registered in the green on Senate Bill 878.
There it is. All right. Without objection, are there any objections? So ordered. All right. We're good. We're looking good on the schedule. Senators, the calendars, the way that we've played out today or this week is likely to be the rhythm moving forward. We'll try to give as many updates as possible if something changes, but you can likely assume that it's Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, mornings that going 11, 10:30, 10:30, 12, I think I think that's correct. If anything changes there, we'll certainly let folks know. We're going to try to avoid Friday afternoons. I can't guarantee it, but we're going to try to avoid it. So if we need to do double sessions because of longer work, we'll try and put them earlier in the week. But we're in a good spot. We've got a lot left, but we're in a pretty decent spot when it comes to calendar. The committee's just been working nonstop, so just appreciate you all sticking through it. All right, let's do committee announcements. Chair recognizes the Chair of Finance.
Finance will have bill hearings at 1:20. Thank you.
All right. Chair recognizes the Chair of Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Senate President. The Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee will meet promptly at 1:30. 1:30.
1:30. All right. Chair recognizes the Chair of Budget and Tax.
Thank you, Mr. President. All three operating subcommittees will meet at 1:30 today. Tomorrow morning at 8:30, we'll have a voting session. And at 10, the Education Subcommittee will meet.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Chair of Judicial Proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Judicial Proceedings Committee will reconvene for bill hearings at 1:30.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Chair of the Rules Committee. Rules Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Rules Committee will meet tomorrow at 10:30.
I believe it may be 11:30. Is it 11:30?
Tomorrow, Friday, at 10:30.
Yep. So I think it's 11:30,
also-
Senator. 11:30.
And also, the Prince George's County Senators will be meeting this evening at 6 o'clock.
6 o'clock,
for
Prince
bill
George's.
hearings. Thank you.
11:30 rules, 6 o'clock, Prince George's. Chair recognizes the chair of the Baltimore County delegation.
Yes, it's good news for Baltimore County. We do not have a meeting tomorrow morning. We do not have a meeting tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam Chair. Any further select committees, delegations? For the good of the order? Yes, the chair of the Baltimore City delegation.
Baltimore City delegation tomorrow at 9 a.m.
9 a.m. Excellent. Thank you, sir. This chair recognizes the chair of the Judicial Proceedings Committee.
Thank you, Mr. President. I neglected to mention that we'll have a voting session tomorrow at 10 a.m.
Voting tomorrow, 10 a.m. Chair recognizes the chair of Ed.
And along the same lines, EHE will have a voting session at 9:45 tomorrow morning.
9:45 voting. All right. We're getting there. All right. Any other announcements before we do a quorum call? If not, let's do that quorum call.
Mr. President.
Oh, so one moment. Yes, chair recognizes the senator from Harford County.
I just wanted to get up for a minute and say that today's the anniversary of the passing of one of our colleagues, Senator Wayne Norman. Lost him, I think it was 4 years ago now. So 3 years ago. Sorry. I just wanted to take a minute and remember him because he always said, "Good to see you, buddy." So just remember him as we go about our day. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. And Senator, you reminded me that today is March 4th, was the first inpatient of a COVID patient in the state of Maryland. It is 1 year today that we had our first inpatient here from this virus, and to think what's been over this last year. Tomorrow evening, and there'll be more tomorrow about it, but tomorrow evening there's going to be a remembrance for all those Marylanders who have passed away from this virus. So it's an auspicious time to think a year ago that this was when it first hit. All right. With that, also just I want to make sure to thank our healthcare workers who have been just absolutely incredible throughout this entire year. They have gotten thanked a lot. We probably can never thank them enough, but they have been exhausted and overwhelmed in ways that we never could have imagined, and just are deeply, deeply thankful for their work. All right. Let's do a quorum call before we adjourn.
Mr. President.
Has everyone recorded their presence? If so, the clerk will take everyone record their presence. Take the call. 47 members in chamber, and the quorum being present, the Senate of Maryland remains in session. Chair recognizes the majority leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the Senate of Maryland stand adjourned until Friday, March 5th at 12 p.m.
Without objection, so ordered. Stay safe, wear your mask, get the vaccine.